This is the second of two videos on Omaha Beach. The first one described the assault and how the men started to get off the beach. So if you haven't seen it, the link is in the description. So let's go and see what happened afterwards. This is Dog Green. It was the worst part of the beach for two reasons. There were 4 strong points near here. In front of us is WN 73. Just here is WN 72. And on top of the bluffs here was WN 71. And then back down there, you can just see the top of the roof in the centre of the image. That's where WN 70 was. And then on that headland in the distance, which is the Pointe du Hoc, there was a 75mm gun there. There's another reason it was the worst part of the beach. That headland where there was a gun also affected the current and the wind that affected the beaches. It affected Utah Beach and the ranges at Pointe du Hoc. Also affected Omaha Beach. So most of the men coming in, the landing craft were drifting eastwards. But the men that came in here, protected by the headland, they came into the right place. And so they ended up being rather isolated from the others in the most heavily defended part of the beach. And in the first wave that came in, it was Company A of the 116th Regiment. They were practically wiped out. They actually closed this beat for landings because it was such a killing field here. Now the rangers that should have gone into Pointe du Hoc as reinforcements, the 500 rangers, they came into Omaha Beach. They were approaching here and they saw that it was carnage here, so they actually went further down the beach that way and ended up where Cota was. That actually helped the men getting off the beach up there. And so the bad luck for the rangers at Pointe du Hoc actually helped Omaha Beach. Those 500 rangers coming in here gave an added impetus to get off the beach. Now this part of the beach, Dog Green, is what was represented in Saving Private Ryan. Now there was no Captain Miller landed here, and no rangers were sent to find the surviving son of the family, even though the film was based on a real family called Nyland. The whole storyline of the film is fictitious, but this is what it represented, and it was very graphically and realistic portrayed in the film. Veterans that saw the film, Saving Private Ryan, they say the only thing that was missing was the smell. This is the other 88mm gun. You saw where the other one was at the other end. These guns could fire 12 miles maximum range and 7 miles with accuracy. The beach is only 4 miles long. Just behind this 88mm gun, there was a 50mm gun in that casement. That casement had 2 openings, so the gun could fire this way and then turn around inside and fire the other way. The concrete lump sticking out at the back was to protect the machine gun that was just there. And then on the hill, you can see the black hole. That's WN 73, where there was a 75mm gun. Now these 3 guns could fire the whole length of the beach. Crossing the road from the casement to the bluff was a concrete wall to stop vehicles coming up, and that's the remnants of it just there with a green plaque on. Now General Cota, he went up the cliffs where we saw, took out WN 70 with his men, and then went into Waverly, which is the top of this draw, up to midday from about 10 o'clock Ships were firing on these bunkers, so it wasn't a healthy place to come down the draw. At midday they'd stopped. He came down the valley, took some prisoners on the way, came through the gap in the anti-tank wall, found some men sheltering by the wall down there on the beach, and organised them into getting the bulldozer and some explosives to come up and blow this wall up. Just at the top of the cliff you can just see the black smudge under a piece of concrete. That was a lookout post connected to guns by telephone, so they could direct them to fire onto the beach from inland. There's the machine gun position covering the draw. The same thing was the other side, but you can't see it. And then in the field of WN 71 you can still see the mortar Tobruk. There's a 50mm gun position, 88mm gun, the lookout post, machine gun position, and the mortar position. It's not quite high tide yet, but you can see there's not much beach left now. The frequency of tides is 12.5 hours. The landing started at low tide 6:30, and so at midday it was high tide. And no vehicles got off the beach until after midday. So any vehicles that had come in were either getting swamped by the tide or squashed up on top of the beach. That's why it was so vital to open up that exit of WN 65. This is WN 61. That casement is for an 88mm gun. The other 88mm gun was the far end of the beach. In between there were 75mm guns and 50mm guns. We're just below WN 61. You can see the casement for the 88mm gun. The other side of the Colville draw is WN 62. Just to the right of the flag you can see the monument to the engineers, which is on top of one of the casements, or 75mm guns. And further to the left you can see the pinnacle, which is the monument to the 1st Division. It's got the names of all the men in the 1st Division who died on Omaha Beach. WN 62 was the biggest strong point along the beach, and it held out the longest till about 3:30. Now just to the left of that tree is a little hump. That was a lookout post, and Lieutenant Fierre was in there. He was actually the commander of a gun battery about 3 miles inland. His batman was Heinz Sevelo. He was just below that in a machine gun position. He's credited as having killed most men on Omaha Beach. As the day wore on, Sevelo was running out of normal ammunition and had to start using tracer shells. And so the ships and the tanks could then see where he was, and they started aiming shots at him. Shells were falling right near his position. The machine gun was knocked out of his hand twice, and he was wounded in the head. Around about 3:30, Lieutenant Fierre said to Sevelo and another man they should go. The Americans were making their way into the Strongpoint by then, and they managed to get out, avoiding the Americans. They went up the road that leads to the cemetery now. Then they went across country and ended up at WN 63. This is WN 63. It's just a command post. There's an entrance with a passage, and then there's a room that goes to the right, and then another room further to the right. Then there was another exit that led up into the fields. It was here that Heinz Sevelo came after he left WN 62, which is down the end of this road by the beach. He was allowed to rest on the floor because he was wounded. And then as night fell, he was instructed with another German to take some American prisoners away. And when they got into Colville, they found themselves surrounded by Americans and then surrendered to their prisoners. And just up there is the crossroads at Saint-Laurent, sur Mer. And just round that bend there was an anti-aircraft gun, and that was called WN 69. Now just here It was either called WN67 or part of WN69, but whatever it was called, there was a bank of Nebelwerfers, that's multi-barreled rocket launchers, and that's what stopped the Americans getting up here from Omaha Beach, up Les Moulins. So that's why the Germans held half of Saint-Laurent until the 7th. Now the church is over there, and the Americans were there on the evening of the 6th, but the Germans held the centre of Saint-Laurent until the 7th. In 2004, I had a veteran on a visit, and he'd been 33 in 1944, which is pretty old for a soldier. So he was 93 in 2004. Now he'd been an engineer. He came in at 6:45, that's just after the first waves. And he said he blew up a roadblock up the Les Moulins exit. So we drove up and we drove down, and he couldn't recognise where it'd been. I said things change in 60 years. So we were going to give it up and go. But then I thought, but he couldn't have gone up that exit because it was blocked by rocket launchers. He must have come up the Rue Quai. So we went to the end of Rue Quai, we came along the road that goes parallel to the beaches, turned down this lane here. And this is Saint-Laurent. And when he saw the church, he said, I remember the church. And he and the other men were sheltering not far from it. And there was a sniper up there, and the sniper was firing at them. Now he was 29th Division, and then some 1st Division men turned up. They said, why is that sniper still there? And they said, well, our officer told us to respect the sanctity of the church. And the 1st Division men said, we'll see about that. They went in the church and shot him. So he came down the road from the church, which is just up there, and then he recognised this house. He said, that's where my roadblock was. And so we did find it. And it actually corresponds with the map I've seen, which marked the concrete roadblock just here. I mentioned Rocco Russo earlier on. He met General Cotter going up the bluff. He spent the night in this churchyard because the Americans took over Waverly. So they had completely taken Waverly. The Germans still held part of Colville and Saint-Laurent. On the 7th, he was part of the men who went towards Pointe du Hoc to relieve the Rangers. Now, when he landed, he was 2nd Battalion, 116th Regiment. They lost so many men when they went off towards Pointe du Hoc. Everybody was put into the 1st Battalion. And then they came back from Pointe du Hoc on the 8th, and there were reinforcements coming in already, and he was put back into the 2nd Battalion. On the 6th, some men of the 29th Division were coming down this lane, and there's a wall on both sides. But at the end there's a door which goes through the wall into the grounds of the chateau. And suddenly a trapdoor opened up in the door, and a machine gun fired at them. So many men were cut down. Luckily the men at the back, you see there's a curve in the road. They managed to splay out on the ground and crawl backwards. Down there is WN72, the Waverly draw. We're here in Waverly. Now the 29th and the 1st Division made up the 5th Corps, and they were commanded by General Gero, and General Gero had his command post in this Chateau Waverly. So by the end of the 6th of June, instead of getting this terrain that had been planned, they got this amount. And instead of getting Saint-Lô in 10 days, it took 6 weeks. There were several reasons for this situation. The terrain made it easy to defend, the bombing was fouled up, the floating tanks all sunk except 2, and there were extra German soldiers here. That is German, as opposed to 40% of the 716th Division being made up of Ostbattalion. In this part of the D-Day zone, there are many vestiges to be visited and many monuments. Now, this is WN61, and this Tobruk for machine guns is here in the middle of a patio, which is part of the sailing club. This is the shingle that many veterans mentioned as they came up the beach. There's not much of it left on the beach, but along here there is. You can imagine trying to dig a foxhole in this. This monument to the combat medics was put up in the autumn of 2018. So it names 36 medics on the beach, and it says that Sergeant Longues set up the first casualty collection point on Omaha Beach at this rock. Further down the beach there's a monument to Charles Shea. He was an American Indian. He went back and forwards from the tide mark up to the top of the beach, dragging wounded men up. One of his colleagues, Edward Morozevich, he was killed on the beach, and all that Charles Shea could do was give him some morphine to ease his pain as he died. This monument is to the 2nd Division. They came in on the 7th, the day after D-Day, because it was the 1st Division coming in here on D-Day, and the 29th at the other end of the beach. The photos on this panel show the 2nd Division walking up the hill behind this casement. See, the road was pretty much as it was today. Just this little wall has been built up on top of the road. This end of the beach is where the 29th landed, and the other end where the 1st Division landed there was just dunes, and then the bluffs. Here there was the sand, the road, and then the bluffs and the houses at the bottom. Well, they'd mostly been demolished by the Germans to get wood. This is in Colville-sur-Mer. They've put photos up showing what it was like at the time. That duck is coming up this road here, which comes up from the beach. And there's the spire of the church, which was demolished by ships firing at it. They fire at churches because they could be used as sniper hideouts, artillery observers. This photo shows the state of the church on D-Day, with some GIs walking past, and they've rebuilt it exactly as it was. This structure is next to the road leading up from the beach at Merville. It was part of one of the artificial harbours that the Allies built. They built 2 of them in 10 days, one at Gold Beach and one here. Now they chose the area because there were no ports, and so they bought 2 of them. Now that was the floating road that went out to the loading dock, and to protect the harbour they towed 6,000-ton blocks across the channel to put them in place to make the wall. And that's another story which will be told in another video. So by the evening of the 6th, the 29th and the 1st Division, they'd got into Waverly, but they still hadn't got the whole of Colville or Saint-Laurent. On the 7th they consolidated the positions, and on the 8th they started moving inland. But all that had been at a great cost. There were 4,000 casualties on Omaha Beach, including 1,000 men killed. Now some of those casualties died from their wounds in the following days, so the death rate is actually above 1,000. Now they did start moving rapidly once they started advancing inland. They were supposed to be at Saint-Lô in 10 days, but they actually got 3/4 of the way to Saint-Lô in 10 days, and then they were held up for 4 weeks. And that's another story. So if you like the videos, give a thumbs up down there, and subscribe here, plus the bell to get notified of new videos. See you soon.